not just talk, as we continue to strive
Thank you, Deacon Knight. Tropical shipping continues to play a major role in disaster recovery throughout the Caribbean and have a record of a number of initiatives in this regard. We are always prepared to immediately extend our aid when a major disaster of any kind strikes. Recently, we worked with both the private and public sectors in waiving freight charges on several containers following the ravages of Tropical Storm Erica in Dominica on August 27, 2015. The theme of this workshop is building a culture of preparedness when second counts, and is a private-public sector forum intended to focus on disaster management's best practices. We have a panel of expert presenters and a dialogue session to achieve just that by working together. We should leave here with a roadmap of where we are, where we want to be, and how we are going to get there. 3 prerequisites come to mind: plan, commitment, and follow through. I want the atmosphere in this room to come alive, being interactive and involved with thoughts and ideas to achieve our goal. You will notice that you have a folder. Each of you would have a folder at the front of you. In this folder, you would find the biography of each speaker. You also find a flash drive with critical business functions, business emergency plan, risk assessment table, and a hurricane fact sheet. So now, I have the pleasure of introducing our very own Mr. Mark Lopez, who's the Assistant Vice President of Tropical Shipping.
Thanks to yourself, Alice, and the entire team for this event. And Jeff would like to disaster management. First, for being here today. In the airport today, Jen insisted we stop for some juice and roast plantain. I think I'm pretty impressed with Dominica so far. I'd also like to give very special thanks to our sponsors, Jolly Sport Young Minions, South Limited, and thank you for your support. Today's an important day as it brings a circle from events that unfold Thursday, August 27. I remember watching America, both from Florida was you, and felt cautiously optimistic as she seemed to have the word strengthened. Tomorrow then started images. Reported rain not stopped and reported flooding. As minutes turned to hours, the severity of the flooding devastation. Support network had Antigua office and supplies the following day. Liaised with the ODM customers, see what the immediate needs were. To a meeting of the Dominican diaspora in Hollywood, Florida, 2 days after the flooding, and there was deep resolve. Deep resolve to help their homeland. They quickly organized under the leadership of Alex and collected clothing and relief supplies and helped coordinate other groups of Dominicans in Orlando, New York, and Atlanta. It was impressive. Alex, if you're here or watching the live feed, as we say in Jamaica, enough respect. As word spread that I was attempting to get to Dominica the following week, Dominicans tearfully pushed family members' names and phone numbers into my hands, desperate to make contact with their loved ones. It was a powerfully emotional time. In the days and weeks that followed, we continued to work closely with the ODM and relief organizations in the U.S., St. Martin, Antigua, Trinidad, St. Vincent, and Barbados to send in supplies while continually working with your private sector to coordinate the movement of needed supplies and restocking goods. Not to call names, I'm not sure if she's here yet, but Jenny Astefan, I have an AT&T bill for you in my bag. Thanks for helping keeping us so well informed. I would like to commend Tamara for your tireless effort post-Erica and the outstanding level of communication with our head office, the ODM, DASPA, and our valued customers. It will certainly be carved in our best practice process for years to come. I would also like to commend the ODM as well as Benoit Badwil from DASPA for their amazing efforts post the storm. I've worked many a disaster recovery effort, but the passion and determination I witnessed in Dominica exceeded anything I've witnessed. Today's workshop represents many years of fine-tuning Tropical's disaster recovery initiative to help strengthen the Caribbean's resiliency to natural disasters. As a young man, I was personally impacted and made aware of the havoc that natural disasters can wreak on an island when Hurricane Gilbert destroyed Jamaica. Since then, of working with Tropical's response team on numerous pre- and post-planning and recovery efforts throughout the last decade, we worked with major supply chains to the Caribbean post-Hurricane Wilma and in the recovery and rebuilding efforts throughout the Caribbean for numerous named storms, including Ivan and, of course, Erica. Dominica has a strong disaster and strong plans, and I'm certain that you have continued to learn from last year's events, but plans can be further bolstered by increased inclusion and integration of the private sector. It has been proven that without coordinated private sector input post a disaster, economic recovery is slow, messy, and costly. Last year in our disaster management workshop in Barbados, we had Hurricane Katrina, where in the years following the disaster, FEMA and private sector their own emergency command center to operate adjacent to the government for assistance in the deployment of relief resources. The Barbados Chamber of Commerce decided to form a similar command center which would work closely under the direction from the ODM pre- and post a disaster to assist the government in a coordinated re-entry of critical business sector such as grocery, building material, and health services, and the provision of critical relief supplies. Dominica's private sector definitely has the flexibility and drive to execute. Through all the years of the workshop, and this one to emphasize and government take care of their needs. And as importantly, their employee families, they get back to normal much more quickly and efficiently. After Wilma hit South Florida, our conference rooms became childcare centers. Food was brought in to feed their families, and gasoline, ice, and water were provided daily. With that, we were able to sail the very first vessel from South Florida a short 48 hours after the hurricane passed. As part of your business continuity plan, your staff should be made aware that you will be there for them and their families post a disaster. It has been written time and time again that natural disasters bring out the very best in the human spirit, a human instinct to care for one another. If we wrap that survival spirit around a well-laid plan where everyone has a role to play, our communities and the economy will recover more quickly. Today, we have the opportunity to build on the foundation of the framework for disaster recovery and contribute to a more resilient economy. I encourage you to be open in your dialogue and contribute to the workshop group discussions. The workshop theme is building risk-aware and resilient communities. At the end of the presentations by the disaster management professionals, we will break into 2 working groups. Group 1 will discuss minimizing the impact on the economy post a disaster. And Group 2 will discuss the long-term strategy for private sector recovery and resiliency. After the working groups, we will reassemble for our conclusions. I'd now like to close in having you watch this video on leadership to reduce formalities and encourage creative thought.
Thank you, Mark, for that very inspiring video. I'll now introduce and welcome Mistress Teresa Campbell-Cavan, the Executive Director of Dominica Association of Industry and Commerce.
Thank you, Tamara. Honorable Miriam Blanchard, Minister for Public Works and Ports, representing the Prime Minister of Dominica. Ms. Jennifer Nugent-Hill, Director, Governmental and Community Affairs at Tropical Shipping. Mr. Mark Lopez, Assistant Vice President of Tropical Shipping. Ms. Nivea Butler, Chief, Public-Private Cooperation Division Partnership Directorate, U.S. Southern Command. Professor Roy Watlington, University of the Virgin Islands, founding member of the Caribbean Integrated Coastal Ocean Observing System. Mistress Sally Yearwood, Executive Director of Caribbean Central American Action. Mr. Benoit Badwell, Chief Executive Officer, Dominica Air and Seaports Authority. Ms. Stephanie Astefan, Executive Vice President, Dominica Hotel and Tourism Association. Mr. Fitzroy Pascal, Acting National Disaster Coordinator, Office of Disaster Management. Mr. Cecil Shillingford, Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance. Other government officials, public and private sector invitees, other invitees, the IC members, the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is indeed an honor to be here this morning representing the Dominica Association of Industry and Commerce, the DAIC, a proud member of the 2016 Disaster Management Workshop Series under the theme, Building Risk-Aware and Resilient Communities. I extend apologies for President Mr. Jeffrey Baptiste, who is unable to join us this morning due to another work-related engagement. I am by no means an expert in disaster preparedness or risk management. However, I am aware of some key facts as it relates to the world, the region, and our beautiful island home, Dominica. As an international relations major, I typically refer to international and regional agreements, policy, and standards on the topic being discussed, and I will do the same today. Climate change, or change in average weather condition, is often the forefront of discussion relating to natural disasters in recent times. From April 1st, 2016, there has been 55 facts about climate change and the Paris Agreement posted on the UN Information Center Windhoek social media page. These facts include fact number 5. Global emissions of carbon dioxide have increased by almost 50% since 1990. Fact number 17, the risks of abrupt or irreversible changes increases as the magnitude of warming increases. Fact number 21, climate change affects every country on every continent. Fact number 29, climate change will amplify existing risks and create new risks for natural and human systems. Fact number 30, Paris Agreement affirms the importance of education, training, cooperation, and public participation and awareness. And finally, fact number 31, most aspects of climate change will continue for many years, even if emissions stopped. To quote from a website focused on natural disasters in the Caribbean, Caribbean Tectonics, due to the extensive and interestingly tectonic environment, the Caribbean region is rife with natural hazards. From earthquakes to tsunamis and volcanoes, the potential for disaster in this region is remarkable. According to the University of the West Indies Seismic Research Center, on May 9th, 2016, this year, an earthquake occurred northeast of Dominica. On May 8th, 2016, an earthquake occurred north of Antigua. On April 29th, an earthquake is felt north of Paria Peninsula in Trinidad. June 1st marked the beginning of the 2016 hurricane season. Again, hurricanes are another form of natural disasters that we face in the region. The Weather Company predicts 2016 to be the most active season since 2012, with 14 named storms, 8 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes predicted. All of us here today know we are not just talking about earthquakes or hurricanes. Even Tropical Storm Erica on August 27, 2015, demonstrated the very real risk of heavy rainfall and the potential to result in devastating flooding and landslide that we face as a nation. We saw the high costs associated with the damage caused by Tropical Storm Erica across our productive sectors, our infrastructure, not to mention the social costs. So far, I've only mentioned natural disasters, but disaster management should not only consider natural disasters, but human-induced disasters such as fire, cyber attacks, communications disruptions, theft, structural equipment failure, etc. All of the above form part of the very real risks that we face as a global community and as a nation. The Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030 is the first major international agreement on the post-2015 development agenda. Its 7 targets include substantially reducing damage to critical infrastructure and disruption of basic services such as health and educational facilities, which includes developing resilience. It seeks to reduce the direct disaster economic loss in relation to global gross domestic product by 2030, and to substantially increase the number of countries with national and local risk reduction strategies. The 4 priorities for action of the Sendai Framework are firstly, understanding disaster risks, strengthening disaster risk governance to manage disaster risks, thirdly, investing in disaster risk reduction and resilience, and fourthly, enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response and to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. Last year, following Tropical Storm Erica, the DAIC Straw on It luncheon, Building Back Better, spoke to the proper determination of risks in order to establish effective disaster management plans, good planning and proactive rather than reactive disaster management. To be risk aware and prepared is no longer an option we have as a nation, as business leaders, as communities, or as individuals. Disaster mitigation is key. Building a culture that is risk-aware and communities that are resilient is critical to our development. I am happy to be part of this diverse group of stakeholders here today who are willing and ready to work together to develop this culture of being prepared for disasters in whatever form they may take. To work together to mitigate the impacts of disasters on our businesses, employees, our families, their families, communities, and our nation. This is why we are here today. So we work together, government, private sector, civil society. We take the necessary steps to build awareness and to make the necessary sacrifices to ensure against impending risks. It is well known that planning and preparation will in fact reduce the time needed to recover from disaster. Although our international partners are usually willing to support during this time, we cannot depend on this. We have to work together. We have to be proactive. We have to make the necessary investments and plan the plans required to build awareness and resilience in the face of disaster. I would like to commend Tropical Shipping, the Office of Disaster Management, Caribbean American Action, and all of you here today who are making this happen. The DAIC stands ready to support and collaborate with the ODM and assist with planning and all training activities designed to train personnel to prepare for, cope, or prevent the impact of disaster emergency, and to encourage all our members and all private sector to do the same. I am personally looking forward to this workshop, and so I wish all of us today a very productive morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Cowan, for DAIC's commitment and support. I do agree, we all have to work together to make this happen. We'll now introduce Ms. Stephanie Astafan, who is the Executive Vice President of Dominica Hotel and Tourism Association. Ms. Stephanie Astafan.
Thank you, Tamara. Government and public sector officials, visiting delegates, sponsors, participants, members of the media, good morning. The Dominica Hotel and Tourism Association is a non-profit organization providing centralized and innovative information, advocacy, and leadership for the tourism industry in Dominica. DHTA commends tropical shipping on this initiative, building a culture of preparedness. The negative economic impact of non-existent or weak coordination among stakeholder communities in disaster preparedness and response cannot be understated. And conversely, the positive benefits of joint public-private partnerships in disaster readiness are well established. The DHTA remains committed to its role in promoting a state of resilience, readiness, and response in the tourism industry and amongst our members. This forum will provide an invaluable opportunity to engage stakeholders across a variety of industry segments and to share best practice experience. I look forward to a productive session. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Astaphan. We'll now have a presentation by Ms. Nevia Butler, who's the Chief Public-Private Cooperation Division Partnership Directorate, U.S. Southern Command. Welcome, Ms. Butler.
Good morning. As you bring my slides up, I just want to say I thank Tropical Shipping and our partner, the Caribbean and Central America Action, for inviting U.S. Southern Command to be a participant at this conference. I'm honored to be here with the government officials from Dominica, your private sector, and your civil society. While he gets set up, I'll continue. I've been asked to share my thoughts and experience in public-private cooperation during disaster preparedness and humanitarian assistance missions. For the next 10 minutes, I'll touch on how U.S. Southern Command engages with the private sector, businesses and academic institutions, and non-governmental organizations to assist the nations in the Caribbean and Latin America in disaster management and theater security cooperation activities. There's no cookie? Okay. U.S. Southern Command, widely known as SOUTCOM in the Department of Defense, is widely known as SOUTCOM and is a Department of Defense organization in Miami, Florida. The command is a joint and interagency-oriented organization with Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, Coast Guard service members, civilian employees, and contractors. SOUTCOM has 33 interagency representatives from 15 U.S. government agencies working in our headquarters side by side with our DoD team. Next slide. Can you go back? No. Oh. Sorry. Right there. Thanks. SOUTCOM strives to be the partner of choice for the nations in the region as they address the challenges in the environment, which includes transnational organized crime, drugs, violence, corruption, and natural and man-made disasters. I've been an employee at SOUTCOM for almost 19 years. 5 of those years were spent as a senior disaster preparedness officer for the command, working to assist the nations in the region to build their capacity to mitigate and manage natural and man-made disasters. The last 9 years has been spent in the newest directorate in our command, which is a partnering directorate. Partnering has responsibility for interagency, integration, and coordination within the headquarters, and also for public-private cooperation. How's it going? Okay. At SOUTCOM, we apply a whole-of-society approach to addressing the challenges in the region. That means engaging every element in the public and the private sector, working in a collaborative manner with government, international organizations, regional mechanisms, non-governmental organizations, businesses, think tanks, and academic institutions. In public-private cooperation, our goal is to extend the reach and effectiveness of the sustainable impact of the command activities. We partner with organizations that have complementary goals and seek to leverage their knowledge and expertise in order to have a unity of effort within the region. Some of our current public-private cooperation engagement and initiatives are, for example, our Beyond the Horizon and New Horizon exercise. These are exercises where U.S. military members build schools and clinics within our partner nations. In the Public-Private Cooperation Division, which I manage, we engage with non-governmental organizations, businesses, and academic institutions to support those efforts. What does that entail? The U.S. service member goes in and they build a structure, a building. It's an empty building. The private sector, the non-governmental organizations, and the academic institutions come in to support us. Private sector by providing equipment, at times computers for the classrooms, NGO donating school supplies and backpacks, and our academic institutions doing the same. The end result is that rather than the United States government turning over a building, we have provided that nation, normally in an underserved area, with a full operating structure that can serve that community. The business institutions, through their corporate social responsibility programs, and in some cases their foundations, they support many of our activities within the region. Another example of what we do is medical readiness exercises. Those are done at times within the country, working in coordination with the Ministry of Health within that nation. I could tell you what flight, but I'll keep going. Okay. Or the Continuing Promise naval ship. You might have seen the mission of the USNS Comfort. In 2015, the ship went to 11 countries within the region. And when I talk about the region, I talk about Central South America and and the Caribbean. Within the Caribbean, the ship went to Jamaica, the Dominican Republic, and Haiti. Our partnership with the non-governmental organizations and the business and academic institutions doubled the capacity of what the ship could do. For example, the operating room on the USNS Comfort, half of that operating room was used by the medical personnel. The other half of the operating room was used by Operation Smile to do surgeries on cleft palates in the different nations that the command visited. That is a huge accomplishment. 50% of the operating room was seized or permitted for the NGO usage. On that ship, we had NGOs like Project Hope, Latter-day Saints, Operation Blessing. We also had NGOs locally within the nations that came in and collaborated doing the medical readiness exercise, both on the ship, and at times medical readiness exercises take place within the country, in the countryside. Those projects are important. The reason we engage with US-based NGOs is at times for their capacity. But we also engage with NGOs, private sector, and academic institutions locally in the nations. And the reason we do that is for the sustainment of the project. At Southern Command, we have come to the understanding that for people to be engaged, just like we're going to do this morning in this room, everyone has to feel that they're a part of the problem set and also the solution to that problem set. So that's why we engage the local NGOs, businesses, and academic institutions. Because when the U.S. military is no longer on site, those are the organizations and the entities that will keep that local community moving forward. Another one of our examples is Trade Winds. Somebody's good. Or Trade Winds exercise. Primarily a security type exercise many years ago. For some of the ones that are in the room that have been in disaster management for a while, you'll know that many years ago it was primarily a military security type exercise. I had colleagues like Mr. Jeremy Collymore, Donovan Gentles, and some others throughout the years, and what we worked at was getting the National Disaster Officers and the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency also integrated into Trade Winds. Because many years ago we realized that it was a huge importance with the military and the security forces exercising with the National Disaster Officers so that when you did disaster response, it was in a synchronized manner. In other words, the military trained exercise in accordance with your comprehensive disaster management plan that was developed within the region. Now when you think about the National Disaster Officers and SEDIMA being at Trade Winds, it's normal operating business. So what have we taken on now as our new challenge? Introducing the public and private sector into that exercise. As I noted, I did disaster preparedness before. I'm doing public-private cooperation now. So the military members are now seeing that I'm trying to introduce another facet into their exercise. In 2016, for the first time, we're going to have the private sector playing in Treadwinds. Our partners from Tropical Shipping will be there with us. American Airlines, Amerijet, and Airbnb will be playing virtually from the United States. Why are my division asking for that to happen? Because we realize, just like it's mentioned earlier this morning, that the private sector is a very key part of the response within a nation. For you to be effective in any nation, the public and private have to be collaborating, communicating, coordinating, and cooperating. As I was at the airport a couple days ago back in Miami with Jennifer, we spoke about success stories when it comes to public-private cooperation. And I'll just cover, next slide please, I'll just cover two examples. One is depicted at the top of the slide, and that was a fire that took place in Brazil in 27 January 2013. There were 242 people killed and 630 injured. But what you didn't hear every day on the news was the fact that some of those injured had inhaled toxic fumes. So Brazil was in need of a very important antidote. And it was available at the time in the United States from Pfizer. The government of Brazil reached out to the government of the United States seeking assistance to get that antidote as soon as possible in order to save lives. The call came up to U.S. Southern Command, and through a humanitarian assistance program, the Sino kits were purchased through the Defense Logistics Agency. The Sino kits were actually in St. Louis, Missouri. The Public-Private Cooperation Division got involved because the transportation of those Sino kits in a fast and expedient manner was urgent. We contacted our partners at Miami-Dade Aviation, located in Miami, Florida. We work closely with Miami-Dade Aviation and other local government officials. Miami-Dade Aviation reached out to their partners, Airport Councils International, and their members, which are the airlines. As they put the word out, American Airlines stepped forward and said they'll take the medication free of charge. They had the Department of Defense deliver the medication to them in Missouri. They flew it down to Miami immediately. It was a public-private effort on both sides. In the United States, the interagency integration that I talk about in the J9 Directorate was in full force. The Department of Homeland Security engaged because of Customs and Border Protection and Transportation Security Administration. The Department of State because of their interaction with the government of Brazil. The Department of Defense, the Health and Human Services, the Department of Commerce because of the initial search for the medication. Interagency integration coordination, which is part of what we do. The public-private side, I mentioned earlier, by American Airlines and others stepping forward. But that didn't just happen in the United States. You also saw public-private cooperation within Brazil. Because American Airlines flies that medication into Brazil, it's received on the Brazilian tarmac by the Brazilian Air Force, Brazilian Ministry of Health, and other Brazilian government officials and Foreign Affairs, along with the Department of State. Interagency integration within Brazil. And then you saw more of the public-private cooperation side as those government officials had to work with the medical facilities that were treating the patients. Folks, we can't wait to exchange business cards during a disaster. We have to do it beforehand. We have to build the relationships beforehand. We have to do the communication, the coordination, the cooperation, and then expand that to collaboration beforehand. Another, my second example, and one of my proudest moments, was my cooperation with the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management and the National Disaster Offices as they prepared for the 2007 Cricket World Cup. It was really a very proud moment for the region because you all worked as a unit. The military forces trained as a combined unit. Everything was addressed as impacting the region. It was no longer stovepipe and people thinking about how it impacted their nation. As Sedima approached me and said, how do we go about trying to build the capacity and get prepared for the games? We sat down and we developed, with the cooperation with SALCOM, a three-pronged approach to be able to prepare for Cricket World Cup. And this is strictly in terms of disaster preparedness. So I'm not saying that it's everything that was done, but just strictly in this sense. And in that three-pronged approach, we did, prong one was workshops, and training. And that brought the 8 nations that were going to host the games and the other nations that were from the region to Barbados, and we did a series of workshops and trainings. Nations exchange information, training, capacity that they had, so everybody sort of knew what the other could provide. In addition to that, I worked with what we have in the United States called the State Partnership Program. That's a global program where states within the United States are partnered with a nation within the world. And we have nations that are partnered with the nations within this region. One of my primary points of contact was the District of Washington. And the reason is they're partnered with Jamaica. And they had a very strong relationship already. But besides that, we also engaged the other state partnership programs that were partnered in the Caribbean. They all came together. When we did the training and the workshops, especially DC, sent members down from the DC Emergency Management Agency, their transportation, their health department, and other government officials so that they could share their expertise with the region. That's prong 1. Prong number 2 was having scenarios built into trade winds that could exercise, have injects that related to things that could happen during Cricket World Cup. That was a feat in itself, never done before, but the military and security personnel saw that it was important. So that's the number 2 thing that we did, exercise how something could possibly happen. And the number 3 approach was taking the 8 nations, representatives from the 8 nations that were hosting games, their national disaster officers and their military and security personnel, up to Washington, D.C., to be able to interact with the leaders in the national capital region. As most of you know, when anything big happens in the United States, it's normally happening within Washington, D.C. That's where we host a lot of dignitaries. That's where a lot of high-level functions take place. D.C. Guard did a public-private cooperation segment for it. They got all of their agencies involved. They did incident command system training. They did a number of presentations and forums that help the nations to understand how things are done within the region. And they went one step further. They coordinated with the Washington Nationals, which is from the Major League Baseball. And we selected a date where there was going to be a major game taking place where the countries could see how things were executed from the beginning, the first thing in the morning to the end. That included traffic flow, whether it was vehicle or pedestrian, how the command post is run by the police, the fire, the medical team. The whole shebang is what we call it. So the teams were able to get exposed to everything from beginning to end. The nations were thankful. They felt they learned a lot. But the biggest end result for all of us there is nobody talks about the fact that the Cricket World Cup games went off without a hitch. The National Disaster Officers and SEDEMA did their job, and they did it flawlessly. That wasn't done, or it didn't happen by accident. It happened because of preparedness. It happened because of the cooperation, and it happened because of the coordination and collaboration that took place beforehand. I am really, truly honored to be here with you. I look forward to the discussions that we have throughout the day. I once again thank Tropical Shipping and CCAA, my friend Sally Yearwood, who's not here, but our partner there at Southern Command. We thank your government officials for allowing us to be here, and I look forward to the day's discussion. I thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nevia Butler, for such an informative presentation. We'll now have special remarks from Ms. Miriam Blanchard, who's representing the Prime Minister of Dominica.
Thank you, Ms. Lowe. Ms. Jennifer Newgate-Hill, Director, Governmental and Community Affairs at Tropical Shipping. Mr. Mark Lopez, Assistant Vice President of Tropical Shipping. Ms. Nevia Butler, Chief Public-Private Cooperation Division Partnership Directorate, U.S. Southern Command. Professor Roy Watlington, University of the Virgin Islands, and founding member of the Caribbean Integrated Coastal Ocean Observing System. Ms. Teresa Campbell Carbon, Executive Director, Dominica Association of Industry and Commerce, DAIC. Ms. Stephanie Astefan, Executive Vice President, Dominica Hotel and Tourism Association. Mr. Fitzroy Pascal, Acting National Disaster Coordinator, Office of the Disaster Management. Mr. Cecil Shillingford, Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance. Other government officials, public and private sector invitees, other invitees, the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Before I begin today, allow me to express apologies on behalf of the Honorable Prime Minister, who regrets that he's unable to join us today due to another engagement. He, however, sends to you best wishes for a productive session today. I am particularly happy to be here this morning to deliver remarks at this topical and well-timed disaster management workshop under the theme, Building Risk-Aware and Resilient Communities. I also want to thank Tropical Shipping for inviting the Honorable Prime Minister, whom I am representing, to make this presentation and to congratulate the consortium of private sector, non-governmental organizations, regional bodies, government, and the United States Agency for International Development for mounting what I deem a very important workshop. It is my fervent wish that this workshop will open up a new channel for constructive dialogue between the private sector and the government as we pursue the common goal of building a more risk-aware and resilient country. By combining our relative strengths, each of us doing what we do best, we may find that this goal is readily within our reach. I note that you have presented a working definition for the word resilience for the purpose of this workshop. You have defined the words as, open quotes, the ability to withstand stress and catastrophe, to become strong, healthy, or successful after something bad happens, end quote. When this definition is placed alongside the situation prevailing in our local communities, we can be proud that we have made considerable advances in empowering our communities and encouraging them to be more self-reliant and self-sufficient. However, there is still a lot of work that we have to do. This is strikingly evident, for example, in a prevailing and often disappointing exhibition of some community members whom, by their actions, indicate that they refuse to be responsible citizens, even in small things. Let me take the case of littering. The government, through the Ministry of Tourism and Urban Development, and in collaboration with the Roseau City Council, engaged a number of people to keep the streets, sidewalks, and drains of the city clean. Alas, within a matter of hours, the litter had reappeared. It appears that whoever was responsible for the littering was either insensitive to or was not aware of the benefits of a clean environment to health, well-being, investment, and business activity. It is possible to cite numerous other instances where decisions and choices people make, be it where they locate their homes, often I am told without the permission from the Physical Planning Division, or in their eating habits, expose themselves to the risks that they later live to regret. The same criticism can be made of some governments in decisions they make about utilizing scarce resources in the development of their respective countries. With this said, I wish to view the challenge presented in your theme from two perspectives. The first relates to risk awareness. Many of us, individuals and organizations, are prone to keep doing things the way we have been taught or in the manner we believe they should be done. Often, through no fault of ours, it may not be the most effective or efficient way of performing the task. In such cases, there is a lack of awareness of an approach that can bring greater benefits to the organization or individual, using the same and sometimes even with less resources. I wish to submit that the development of a culture of pursuing knowledge is a critical step in building risk-aware individuals and communities. This thinking has been at the core of this Dominica Labour Party's government's education policy, in which we have built a framework for supporting the pursuit of knowledge from the preschool level right through to university. I would go further to submit that government's entire social program, be it in the housing revolution, the care for the elderly, and the engagement of local authorities in the implementation of community projects, is wrapped around the theme on which you have gathered to deliberate today. Tropical Storm Erika, which impacted Dominica in August of last year, was our country's most recent experience of a disaster. The extensive loss of life, destruction to property, roads, and bridges negatively impacted our economy and left many of us in shock. This unusual weather event of approximately 16 inches of rain in only 5 hours exposed our profound vulnerabilities, some of which we had grown comfortable with for decades, while it also revealed those that we were woefully unaware of. In summary, Tropical Storm Erika taught us the following. 1, that some communities were developed on lands that were not stable. 2, some communities or individual homes were built on riverbeds or too close to the banks of rivers, a phenomenon rooted in our developments going back to colonial times. Some of our bridges were not designed or built to withstand events Some of our bridges were not designed or built to withstand events such as Erika, which experts tell us will be the new norm. Just so that I can expound on this one, we had situations where the flow from the rivers was so extensive that it flooded the banks of our rivers. Too many homes and business owners seem unaware that insurance of their respective properties was a means of building resilience. The experience has led government to adopt the approach of building back better, as we seek to put our country and the economy back together again. However, in order to do this, and particularly to rebuild the infrastructure, we require additional skills and specialties not readily available locally. We therefore have to obtain input from external sources, and this is taking some time as those skills are usually in high demand. I want to leave you with the thought that leadership plays a vital role in nurturing an awareness of risk and in carrying this awareness into programs and strategies that build resilience. Wherever an organization or an enterprise has built a track record of excellence and success, there is a visionary, creative, knowledgeable, and bold leader sitting at the helm. It is my wish that the many leaders gathered here today at this workshop will acquire additional armor in making their respective enterprises and organizations more resilient. Best wishes once again for a productive workshop. And to those of you visiting our shores, I do hope that you will have the opportunity to experience our unique tourism product. I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Miriam Blanchard. Professor Watlington would like to make a presentation to the Office of the Prime Minister.
And then finally, a tsunami, the best documented tsunami that has occurred in the Caribbean in recent years. It's a great case study for other communities to follow and to study. and we hope that he will enjoy reading this. Thank you.
Thank you to Professor Watlington and Honorable Miriam Blanchard. We regret to inform you that Honorable Blanchard has another meeting that she has to attend to, so she will be leaving in a few minutes. So we move on with our agenda. We'll now have our presenter, Mr. Cecil Shillingford, from his representative of USAID Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance, Mr. Cecil Shillingford.
Well, the Honourable Minister is just leaving. Honourable Minister for Public Works and the Ports, Miriam Blanchard, representing the Honourable Prime Minister of Dominica, Miss Jennifer Nugent-Hill, Director, Governmental and Community Affairs of Tropical Shipping, Mr. Mark Lopez, Assistant Vice President of Tropical Shipping, Miss Nivea Butler, Chief Public-Private Corporation Division Partnership Directorate of U.S. Southern Command, and I can vouch for all what Ms. Butler has said today, because since 1995 I've been working closely with Southcom. Ms. Stephanie Astafan, Professor Roy Watlington, University of the Virgin Islands, founding member of the Caribbean Integrated Coastal Ocean Observing System. Mrs. Teresa Campbell Carbon, Executive Director, Dominica Association of Industry and Commerce, DIC. Ms. Stephanie Astafan, Executive Vice President of the Dominica Hotel and Tourism Association. Mr. Fitzroy Pascal, Acting National Disaster Coordinator, Office of Disaster Management, other government officials, public and private sector invitees, other invitees, the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. This morning I just want to share some thoughts with you on business continuity and public-private sector partnership, the areas we'll be focusing on today. Emergency management is rapidly becoming a way of doing business in the private sector, as well as expanding its traditional role in the public sector. Organizations, both public and private, must make every effort to prepare for, protect against, respond to, recover from, and mitigate threats or impacts of man-made and natural disasters. The corporate world has begun to realize the importance of maintaining business continuity during a disaster in order to survive. Bridging the gap between private and the public sector is a vital component during disaster recovery to assure success. As crisis management becomes more prevalent in the private sector, the importance of participation and communications between the private and public sectors to facilitate recovery will become clear. 4 keys to coping with disaster and recovering from its effect are an efficient preparedness plan. Just hold back on that. That's not what I'm presenting right now. Sorry about that. An effective preparedness plan, early and timely warning and advice, a sound response plan, and a fast-paced progressive recovery plan. These essentials will allow you to maintain continuity of operations and to get your agency functioning at full efficiency after a disaster. Business community management systems and resiliency program. Business continuity encompasses a loosely defined set of planning, preparatory, and related activities which are intended to ensure that an organization's critical business functions will either continue to operate despite serious incidents or disasters that might otherwise have interrupted them, or will be recovered to an operational state within a reasonably short period. As such, business continuity includes three key elements. That of resilience, critical business functions and the supporting infrastructure are designed and engineered in such a way that they are materially unaffected by most disruptions, for example, through the use of redundancy and spare capacity. Recovery, number two, arrangements are made to recover or restore critical and less critical business functions that fail for some reason. And number three, contingency, the organization establishes a generalized capability and readiness to cope effectively with whatever major incident or disaster which occur, including those that were not and perhaps could not have been foreseen. And Tropical Storm Erika may fall in that category. Contingency preparations constitute a last resort response if resilience and recovery arrangements should prove inadequate in practice. A business continuity program must ensure that the necessary steps are taken to identify the impacts of potential losses and maintain viable recovery strategies, recovery plans, and continuity of service. A business continuity management system will specify requirements to plan, establish, implement, operate, monitor, review, maintain, and continually improve a documented management system to protect against, reduce the likelihood of occurrence, prepare for, respond to, and recover from disruptive incidents when they arise. I'll now speak about public-private partnership. A whole society approach is needed to enhance an economy's disaster resilience. This approach should be based on collaborative partnerships across all levels of government, the non-government sector, business sector, civil society, organizations, and communities. As such, establishment of partnerships should be encouraged with the private sector in all phases of disaster management, and that would include the preparatory phase, the alert phase, response, recovery, and mitigation. Strategic approaches and mechanisms for working with the private sector and setting up frameworks for public-private partnerships should be developed and strengthened. The private sector should be engaged in collaborative initiatives to build disaster resilience at local, meaning community, and national level. The aim is to enhance both the capability of the public and the private sector to respond to and recover from disasters. Regular information sharing, emergency planning, and practical exercises are crucial in building resilience. Partnerships should be based on shared responsibilities and clearly assigned roles and tasks that engage the private sector not merely as a source of funding, but use core competencies and expertise and engage the private sector as partners in long-term efforts to build community resilience. Platforms for regular dialogue and sharing of best practices and lessons learned should be enhanced to further raise awareness of the potential of public-private partnerships and help establish responsible and good practices. Existing programs should be identified, leveraged, and built upon to avoid duplication and ensure cost effectiveness. Public-private partnerships aiming to build disaster resilience in an economy should be understood as learning journeys where mistakes are allowed to be rectified and learned from. public-private partnerships should be open to new and innovative ways of working together and allow for flexibility to adapt the partnership as it evolves. Economies should maximize the opportunities that arise from partnerships that develop during a disaster and look to build and strengthen longer-term collaboration or collaborative engagements with these partners. Further collaboration should take place which allows the private sector to better understand and develop capacities in disaster risk reduction. A process for assessing the effectiveness of partnerships should be developed, and both parties understand and agree on the mechanisms. The integration of small and medium-sized enterprises and companies, local NGOs, local academic groups should be encouraged as they play a key role in building local livelihoods and thus contribute to disaster resilience of local communities. These companies and organizations should be supported in efforts to build disaster resilience. The consideration of the crucial role of women in local communities and the local economy should be encouraged further. Women play a fundamental role in building and maintaining livelihoods and community abilities to prepare for, mitigate against, respond to, and recover from disasters. Building local capacity and community education is a key element in building disaster resilience. Public and private sector stakeholders need to play an active role in such efforts. The role of NGOs and volunteers and the extent to which business and community contribution to building resilience and response needs to be recognized and integrated in public-private partnerships. Partnerships should be fully funded and staffed rather than rely on goodwill, and there's not much of that around these days, or personality-based leadership. Long-term success is developed through consistent and adequate funding, dedicated staff, and resources needed to build and grow the partnership. Partnerships may contain similar characteristics, but they should allow for flexibility in their approach to better incorporate regional opportunities, risks, political situations, and other unique features. This tailored approach will enable partnerships to focus resources and funding where it can make the most impact. Government should explore ways to create incentives to leverage public-private partnerships in disaster resilience with the private sector, who are encouraged in partnership as part of their corporate social responsibility programs. Government should work with the private sector to ensure the resilience and continuity of supply chains and essential services in the context of potential disasters. Okay, right now, let me just focus on USAID. The humanitarian side of USAID, there's the development side, which is in Barbados, and the humanitarian side, which is headquartered in San Jose, Costa Rica, works in Latin America and the Caribbean, and channels a lot of US government funding into the very things we are talking about: disaster, risk reduction, effective disaster management, effective responses, being prepared, etc. Regional Risk Reduction Mission of USAID, OFDA, and OFDA is the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance, is to lead US government humanitarian assistance to LAC, which is Latin America and the Caribbean, through disaster response, early recovery, and risk reduction activities, strengthen national, local, and community resilience to disasters. And that is very important. Even the community aspect of it is even more important, because now we are seeing, well, it's not only now we are seeing, but we after some of the things that have happened, we need to focus more in communities, and the Community Disaster Assistance Program is very important. Increase capacities to reduce risk. Next. Next. Regional strategy goals in DRR, disaster risk reductions. This is the regional strategy for the Caribbean. Next. Safeguard the livelihood assets of affected families, and that falls well within you, the private sector, because, I mean, government may be the largest employer, but you yourselves employ significant numbers of people on in various territories. Prevent shelter loss, strengthen disaster risk reduction capacities and response, as well as preparedness. Safeguard livelihoods, and we're looking at protecting affected households' access to microfinancing. And these are facilities that from time to time, when funds are available, they are made available so that people can quickly get back on their feet after an event. Protect small livestock species, assets, strategic seed reserves, and leverage private sector resources. And USAID OFDA tries as best as it can to do some leveraging of private sector resources. Prevent shelter loss. Under prevent shelter loss, improve methods of construction and build back better. Well, you heard the minister spoke about building back better. Land use management, which is a critical issue in Dominica, and I'm sure the good professor over there, he just presented one of those books on basically disasters of the 1800s and how they affected, and the minister also mentioned about people building very close to rivers and things of that nature, or on slopes, or under potential landslides. Support coastal management. Early warning systems is also a key component of the USAID OFDA portfolio to assist countries in putting in place warning systems that could inform people of an impending issue before it happens, not after the fact. Community shelters assist in the wherewithal, not necessarily building community shelters, but providing support for community shelters. And in St. Lucia, only last year, just before one of the events that affected St. Lucia, we were able to do a rain harvesting project in one of the communities. And when the event hit that community, although it was intended just for the shelter, the entire community was able to make use of it. Evolution of training and technical assistance program, and that is one of our key aspects in the portfolio. Support the health sector through PAHO, CDC, and other organizations. And you will find that a lot of the interventions that went on during chikungunya, avian flu in the agricultural sector, even Zika, that USAID OFDA puts in monies into PAHO and the CDC so that the countries can benefit. And some preposition of emergency relief supplies. Support DRR in the education sector. One of the programs we are promoting in the region is the school safety program, and we believe that, I mean, I've been talking a lot in the last few days because we are in the hurricane season, and my major concern is really for the younger people. I mean, we old heads, I think we have perfected hurricane preparedness, but the younger people, they do not listen to news, they do not go on the right places on the internet to do research, etc. And they are the ones who may just get caught in a situation. So we believe starting at an early age and taking that program to the school is one of the good ways in going through the entire population system. and institutionalize disaster risk reduction and management in higher education. And that is bringing disaster risk management into universities and state colleges and what have you. Dominica has opted to host our DRR Education Forum next year here in Dominica. The previous forum was last year, hosted in St. Lucia, and we are currently working on that program. So education and the younger children, that's key to move the process forward. And institutionalizing of disaster risk management. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cecil Shillingford. We'll now have Mr. Benoit Badwell give some brief remarks. Mr. Badwell is the CEO of Dominica Air and Seaport Authority.
Good morning, everyone. Let me first apologize for being here late. I say sometimes what will happen will happen. And I had a traffic accident way back in November 2014. And I was suddenly served with a summons to appear to court this morning. So, well, I wasn't served this morning. I was served a couple of days ago. And I wrote the court asking for me to be excused. And as the system goes, there was no response. And so my attorney advised that I had to appear. And when the matter came up, then I was excused. So I'm here. Nonetheless, let me say it's indeed a pleasure here for us as DASPA, on behalf of the board and management and staff of DASPA, to be associated here this morning with this workshop, disaster preparedness workshop. We've been working along with our partners, Tropical, and here we have Ms. Jennifer Nugent-Hill and the other persons within Tropical. And I want to point out to you that DASPA plays a very important role in relation to transportation being what we consider to be the gateway in and out of Dominica. Since our vital links in relation to air and seaports help us to be able to do a number of things, especially as it relates to emergency situations. For us at DASPA, we are called upon to play a pivotal role in a number of issues. And as a result, we don't only have to do our planning just for the hurricane season, as some persons do, but we are called upon 365 plus 1 day in the leap year to be prepared for emergency situations, and then we have to have contingency plans for almost every situation that you can think of. Simply because we move thousands of persons at our seaports as well as our airports. And given the security considerations these days, we have to be ready to be able to respond. And as such, every strata of DASPA has to be prepared for an eventuality or a situation that may arise. And as a result, we have to constantly put our persons in training, be it through the Red Cross, CPR training, or other things that they normally have, we have to put our persons through, because we consider ourselves as first responders in relation to that aspect of the transportation sector. And we also have to prepare ourselves for a number of issues. Biological issues, we have to be able to determine dangerous cargo and how do we deal with it in the event of a situation. And so I'm putting you in the context in which we're an institution which have to respond. If we have an oil spill, we have to respond. If we have situations whereby you have, be it a bomb threat or otherwise, we have to engage the police, but we have to take first steps and preliminary steps in terms of safeguarding life and property. And so we're in this constant mode, and that's why it's important to have partners both in the private sector and public sector so we can all be prepared and be able to direct the situation no matter when it comes. And so for us, especially with our recent occurrence last year when we had Tropical Storm Erica, surprisingly, we were discussing the issue of the threats in relation to the weather the week before. And in our management meeting the week before, we were discussing the wall at the airport. We had serious concerns, and it's minuted in our minutes, of that wall at the airport and what contingencies we would put in for that wall. Only a week before we were discussing it, and we had indicated that we were going to go to the Ministry of Works to ask for their assistance because we had seen cracks in the wall. The plan was to move persons in the event we had a situation from the land side, which is where everybody gathered, the public side of the airport, to the air side of the airport, because we felt that that was the safest area in which to move persons and to get them out through the fire service area or through the eastern end of the road where the crash gate is towards the seawall. That was the plan, because we had to make an adjustment. Not knowing I would get a call that early morning that in fact the wall had collapsed. And then we basically had to find out how many persons were on compound. But like everything else, our people are trained, and we had an air traffic controller who was trained in terms of managing people in a crisis situation. So we had somebody in the tower that knew what to do to deal with the persons there. And he took command of everybody. There were 12 persons, and basically issued instructions from there. Was the limited telephone communication they had, they were able to speak with us and speak with other persons, and then we did that. But again, like I said, it all goes with the issue of crisis management and training and training and training. It will help in the day when we have a crisis situation on our hands. That happens, and if we go back to the seaside, and we all know the story of the airport, and when I went to the airport the following day, knowing what I knew by telephone the day of it, my first reaction was, how do we get service back to the country? Because there are people in need for medical airlift, there are people in need for other medical situations, and we as the port need to be able to have the port functioning. And I'm not sure if some of you remember, but Canefield was flooded. The ferry terminal was also flooded. And we had to do, the first thing we had to do was to put the ferry terminal back in operation almost the same day. And the next morning we had to put some things in place so that the ferry could leave the following day. And we also had to put Canefield back, because I can see we had to get the Prime Minister back. Because there was communication with me, and I said, there was no way you're going to come, because he wanted to come on a fixed-wing aircraft. And I said, given the conditions of Canefield, there is no way you can make it on a fixed-wing aircraft there. Even if we prepare it, the ground is soft, there is no way, because it was flooded, the water drained out, but there's no way you're going to make it. And I think we need to change the plan from a fixed-wing aircraft to a helicopter. And we basically convinced them, because they were insisting that they wanted to come with a fixed-wing aircraft. And so we had to go into that, and then they agreed a helicopter was the best option. So that's why I'm pointing out to you in relation to what we did. And if we did not have a plan to execute, we would not have been able to bring the service back as quick as we did, because we virtually narrowed our options in the sense that we needed enough runway to bring in an aircraft that could bring medical supplies that were probably required and personnel, if needed, to the airport. We were not thinking of a normal passenger activity. We were thinking of just the emergency routes to open up the country to. And that's how we went after Canefield and the ferry terminal to ensure that Dominica had the capability to do so. And once we did that, we basically was able to bring persons and other materials in a much more agreed fashion. I also want to point out from the standpoint of the seaside that because we have to open up the ports, not only during hurricane season we have wave action. We suffer from wave action throughout the year. And so we also have to have contingencies in terms of what we do. A number of times the ferry, for example, was not able to use the ferry terminal. And what do we do? Do we leave the passengers astray? Do we send the passengers to another port? These are things that we have to do from time to time. And so I am saying to all of you here that we must not wait until there is the hurricane season opens in June for us to go through a level of preparation and a level of readiness. Drills and exercises need to be performed constantly so that when we are called upon to undertake the actual activity, it will become a norm for us. But sometimes we wait and we procrastinate and we leave things for a longer period. And when it does happen, then we're not sure what to do. Not even to know who is in command. Because you may have several persons who then will take the command post. We want to make sure that we're very clear in terms of what we do. And I think I want to say to both the public and private sector that you do have support. I must say that Ms. Peanut Burns is here. She provides valuable support to us from a DASPA standpoint, and we try to do a lot in terms of our security, especially because they are 24 hours on the job. They're there every day, and they can actually respond to whatever situations that may arise. I want to also say that the police plays a pivotal role for us, and anything, the police helps us in training, helps us in support, and they obviously perform the role of keeping this country safe. But we have a role to play, and we try our best to work with the police so that there's no lines crossed, and we're very, very clear. And so I want to say to you that it's important for all of us. DASPA is just one of the entities that plays that role in terms of preparation and ensuring that we are ready for any eventuality. I'm told on the vulnerability index that we are one of the highest in terms of things that we can expect to happen in Dominica. And so there should be no complacency in terms of our approach to disaster preparedness and being ready for an eventuality. The situation is that be it health, and you can see from our standpoint, why would DASPA be involved in health issues? We have to get involved because from a health standpoint, persons move to and fro, and when we have these issues, be it H1N1, whatever the situation is, we're called upon to be vigilant and to take certain actions that would support the Ministry of Health. And so we have to ensure that persons fall within the framework which would safeguard the rest of the citizens. And that is why I'm saying we are part of that network. And we want to make sure that with your support, and especially with friends like Tropical and Jennifer and the rest of our team, as well as the persons from the Disaster Management Office, because I do not want to let them out here, because they play an extremely crucial role in helping us to put forth our plans together, to help us to be focused. Because when we do things, we always try to ensure that we get the solid advice from them, because they are the experts in the field, and we want to make sure that we are constantly seeking the necessary technical advice from them in terms of the plans that we put forward. We are obligated by international provisions to do a number of things. From a security standpoint, we have the International Port Facility Code, ISPS, Port and Ship Facility Code, which requires us to do a number of things. And one of the good things about that code is that we are audited. We're not left on our own. And so probably one of the things that needs to be done by the Disaster Management Office is to carry out periodic audits on certain institutions. And by those periodic audits, they can then report either to the line ministry or through a central facility so that those persons to which remarks are made in the audit need to be able to come up to scratch to be able to say. Because at the end of the day, if you don't perform and if you don't do the things that you're supposed to do, it will become a crisis, not only for you, but for a lot of persons and a lot of institutions. And then government may have to bear the burden for your unpreparedness in the system. So once again, let me say with these few brief remarks, let me thank you for your patience, for having me here. And I want to say again, it is never late to be prepared, because if you're prepared, you'll be better able to save life, property, and the assets that are placed at your disposal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Badwell, for your remarks. We'll now have a presentation by Professor Roy Watlington.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Lowe. Protocol having been established, I give a general greeting to you all. Good morning. In my general greeting, I also want to give congratulations and thanks to you for all that you do. As a scientist, I know the perception is that scientists don't relate to the business community, don't relate to government, but one of the things, not yet, first slide, yeah, go back. But one of the things that, that we appreciate greatly is one of the basic physics principles of conservation of energy, which can be expressed in many common aphorisms like you can't get blood out of stone, and a penny earns, a penny saved. They're really all the same principle. And one of the aspects that come out of that is that all living things have to make a living. And so that's where the business community and the government come in together. In order to keep Dominica and the whole Caribbean region prosperous and healthy and happy, a business community is very important, and a close relationship between business, government, the NGOs, and the academics, of course, is very important. So I thank you for doing what you do. Well, go back, please. One. Well, I am Roy Watlington, and down at the bottom, you see CARICOOS. I urge you to look at caricoos.org. I can't speak about my organization now. I work with it as an elected official, and it is called the Caribbean Integrated Coastal Ocean Observing System. And look at our webpage. We have many products you'll find interesting. We show you the weather in the region. We show you climate currents. We give you estimations of the African dusts and many things that you can incorporate in some of your decisions. For example, ports and airspace authorities, the African dust is very important in some cases, knowing when helicopters particularly can fly. And so we have products there that we urge you to look at, and we look forward to the opportunity to collaborating with Dominica, whether the government, the academic sector, or the private sector, in extending the capabilities of CARICOOS to match the entire global ocean observing system, of which Dominica is a part, and making the whole system more efficient. Next slide, please. I want to further thank, by the way, Tropical Shipping and Caribbean Central American Action for this, what they do. It's a wonderful service, I think, that they offer. And another aspect of thanks, I thank them for including me, because it's a great privilege I get a chance to meet you. Well, as natural hazards go, and as you look at this list of natural hazards, is there anything here that Dominica does not get? I think not. In speaking to Trinidad recently, some of these were not as strong for them. even my island, I'm from St. Thomas, and even my islands where we share almost the complete set with you, we don't have mudslides, mainly because we don't have mud. You know, the fond name for St. Thomas is Rock City, you know, and so mudslides are not a significant problem, but this is quite a repertoire of potential of vulnerability that you have. Next slide. And sometimes you get more than one at one time. I look at the Dominican.net at this headline: earthquake, landslides, and rain creates chaos in Dominica. That was a terrible concurrence with 3 days of rainfall, the Marigot River overflowing its banks, and then landslides and mudfalls driven by the rain occurring, and then a magnitude of 6.3 earthquake. That was terrible. And then more landslides resulting from the earthquake. So we want to ask the question, what makes our region, particularly what makes Dominica, prone to its particular set of natural disasters? Let's deal with the first. The most common, the one that really is the more frequently occurring threat to our islands, and that is tropical cyclone or hurricane, okay, a tropical storm, okay? Well, all of the factors that make you vulnerable are present here in Dominica. We need water. The ocean must have heat energy in it, and, well, the first one, you can't be too close to the equator. If you're less than 4 degrees north or south of the equator, the Earth's rotation does not contribute to the spin necessary to generate a tropical storm. Well, at your latitude, you have, of course, ample distance from the equator, and so that factor you're not protected by that factor. In fact, tropical storms like this latitude, all right? You have abundant warm ocean water, and that's enough said. You need startup moisture and spin from a pre-existing system, and that is where those waves coming off the coast of Africa have, and you are in the path of many of them, as are the U.S. Virgin Islands. You want to be far enough from a major continental system where aspects that could weaken a storm are maximized. Well, let's put it this way. If a storm is being formed far from a continental or atmospheric system which might weaken the storm, such as having too much dry air or too much wind shear. You've heard of wind shear. Wind shear is a good thing. You know, when you hear it said the wind shear is increasing, don't despair. That's good. Wind shear tends to destroy storms, not to enhance them. And so by being far enough away from the North and the South American continent, some of the wind shear factors that might have discouraged the growth of your storm are not present. And you want to have minimum land surface. Dominica is a fairly large land surface, but it's small enough that when a hurricane is crossing, it doesn't lose substantial energy as it crosses. Dominica is also a very moist place, and some of your inland moisture feeds the tropical storm as well. Next slide. All right, and I won't dwell on this, but you know some of these numbers. The main reason I give these numbers is that a lot of times people take some comfort in the fact that a tropical storm is threatened, not a hurricane. It's not expected to reach hurricane strength. And people take false comfort in that. You know that what hit you and did so much damage last year was not a hurricane. It was a tropical storm. The damage from a tropical storm is enough for us all to take them very, very seriously, so that when the winds do finally reach 74 miles an hour and you're in a category, by that time you will have already been experiencing quite a bit of distress, to say the least. You might be interested in the records. The record low pressure for tropical storms is Hurricane Wilma in 2005. That was 882. Some of you might remember Gilbert had the record before with 888 millibars, and this is 882 for Wilma. And the record wind speeds is these are sustained winds, not short burst winds, of 190 miles an hour with Hurricane Allen in 1980. Now, you and I both know that in certain locations, in ravines and guts and the tops of hills, you can get wind speeds much stronger than that, but they come in short bursts, or they come in cyclones, tornadoes. But these are incredible records. I thought you might want to see those. All right. So if you look at the Commonwealth of Dominica's latitude and longitude, you see where you are. You have the warm water. You have ample spin by being away from the equator. You're sufficiently far from continental impediments to storm development. Next slide. Now, looking at that graph a little bit better, with all those lines showing 14 to 1,500 storms going through, you see that in your region, it's totally crisscrossed by lines indicating either a tropical storm or a hurricane has passed. Look at the upper right-hand corner. Those black bars show the zones of vulnerability. and you're clearly in them. Notice that in the one in our region, in the southern part of the Caribbean, as you get down above the equator, but still south of Dominica, but still above the equator, you hit a certain zone that goes all the way down into the South Atlantic, where they don't worry about tropical storms. And, but you don't enjoy that comfort. You're in that danger zone. Next slide. And this is an incomplete, please understand it's an incomplete list. Some of you may have memories or have stories of some that are not on this list that were as strong or as significant, but I don't know if you know that it happened on September 20th in both years, 1833 and 1834. 2 murderous hurricanes caused fatalities, and both of them occurred on the same day. And of course, Hurricane David, Hurricane Allen, Hugo was bad. Lenny was totally surprising. I'll speak a little bit more about that and how it impacted Dominica uniquely. Now go back one more. And excuse me. And then down at the bottom, not a hurricane, but so very distressing. And you have still my sympathies and condolences and pledges to still help you in any way that I or anyone in the U.S. Virgin Islands might be able to help you in recovering from Tropical Storm Erica. All right, and so here's some of the paths. The one on the left is Lenny. We call it Wrong Way Lenny. It came from the west and went east, and I would have bet money, with my knowledge and training in meteorology, that it would not have continued. But it did continue, and it continued and strengthened even to the extent that it had great impact. And there's the path of Erica, which was going, of course, from southeast to northwest. Next slide. Okay, now you know something about the structure of a hurricane. It's a low-pressure area. The winds around it are counterclockwise, but I want to pay some attention to the counterclockwise surface winds. Next slide. Because it matters what side of the hurricane you're on in terms of what the damage that you'll sustain. Now look at this one. This is Hurricane Hugo of 1989, and it's and give it a one hit, one thing, good. And the dangerous quadrant is the front right quadrant. That's where the yellow arrow indicating hurricane direction, the direction of the hurricane winds, which are counterclockwise, okay, and the red arrow indicating the forward motion of the hurricane. When those two add up, you get stronger winds in that quadrant. And that's almost all, in the northern hemisphere, I should stress, that's always the front right quadrant. In this case, Hugo's front right quadrant hit Montserrat rather seriously. Next, please. And you would say, well, most of the storms go through in that manner, so they'd have to go through south of Dominica in order for you to get a front right quadrant. Here comes Lenny, all right? And what does Lenny do? It comes from the north and the northwest, and so that you were very close to the front right quadrant, and that's why some of the impacts were so great, even though the storm did not actually pass over Dominica. Next slide. All right. So then, folks, you know the destructiveness of severe storms. You really do know. Okay, and so you can share your experience with others. The winds and the low pressure damage where people live, the infrastructure, agriculture, water quality, everything. You get the storm surge, which intrudes inland, flooding, creating beach erosion, destroying seagrasses, destroying coral reefs, and you have infrastructure also caused by storm surge. You have inland flooding from the rain that occurs in there. And then you have hazmat contamination. And by contamination, I mean the release of hazardous materials, whether they be biological or chemical, sewage or medical waste, when the storm disturbs septic systems or when salt water from the sea penetrates into your groundwater and contaminates that as well. That takes the longest time to recover. You know, cleaning up afterwards and making your water healthy again and then also the creation of puddles, pools, and the presence of dead material, plants and animals dead, create unhygienic circumstances that could lead to infectious diseases. In 1867, that hurricane, an earthquake and tsunami that I mentioned, the loss of life from the actual earthquake and tsunami was only 30 people. But many, many people died in the months afterwards because of yellow fever. Next slide. All right, so then, you know a lot about hurricanes and tropical storms. What makes Dominica prone to natural disasters in the form of earthquakes? And it's where you are. Your latitude and your longitude again. Here, it's not your latitude so much north of the equator, but your longitude that puts you right on the edge of the Caribbean plate. and that's very significant. So by either being near plate boundaries or by having, such as the Caribbean Subduction Zone or the Puerto Rican Trench and some of the others, by having faults intersecting either the ocean nearby or the interior of the island, by having continental or island shelves that are thickly accumulated with sediments, where those sediments might become dislodged, roll down, and create tsunamis, in fact, or by having active volcanoes near the ocean that can generate quakes as they develop. That's just for quakes now. We're not talking about the volcano itself, and further can later create landslides. Okay, so you probably know already that the Earth's crust is solid, yes, but broken up into sections, and we enjoy a very small plate there in the center called the Caribbean Plate. It's an active plate. It's moving east with respect to the North and South American plates, which are to the east of it, and it is causing subduction, where those plates are being overridden by our plate. Well, it's not a smooth process. It's very rough. It's erratic, it's rough, energy is stored up and then released abruptly, and it's released most usually as earthquakes. And since this might be underwater, it has the potential for generating tsunamis. The earthquakes that in themselves are a threat, also by occurrence, if you put a dot everywhere where an earthquake occurs, the color of the dot tells you how deep it is, and the size of the dot tells you how large the earthquake was. You see that the dots delineate the Caribbean region. In fact, that is how we know the exact boundaries of the Caribbean plate, because it is along those boundaries that interaction with the surrounding plates is occurring, creating earthquakes that then help us to make this graph. And you see over in your region, if you follow 15 degrees north right across, you'll see that you get a lot. You get your share as well. Next slide. All right. Now, I want to give you a case study. You know about the tragedy of Haiti, and we all continue to have sympathy, and our hearts still go out for the people of Haiti. Until it killed more than 230,000 people. I heard a revised figure recently, and I believe as they learn more, they find that even more than 230,000 people lost their lives. But I want to compare it to a hurricane that occurred the same year, the very next month, in Chile, where the loss of life was 700 people. Now look at the facts here. The Haitian earthquake was a 7.0. I won't say only a 7.0, because a 7.0 is a murderous earthquake. But when you compare it to the Chilean earthquake, that was an 8.8, about 40 times more powerful, actually. Right? Nevertheless, the fatalities in Chile were only 700. Let's look at the reason why, and this helps to show where the public sector, the private sector, and people's awareness is very important, and people's circumstances. First of all, a deep earthquake is felt less than a shallow earthquake. And the Haitian earthquake was at a depth of 13 kilometers, which may sound like a big number to you, but as far as the Earth's crust goes, it's fairly shallow. The Chilean earthquake was 3 times deeper. Therefore, less energy manifests on the surface. The population to the nearest city, Port-au-Prince, in the case of Haiti, is 2 million people. Whereas in the case of Chile, the nearest city was Male, and that population is 1/10, 200,000. So that's a human factor. The distance from the city center, well, in fact, the earthquake overlapped all the suburbs and right into the city, in the case of Haiti, was 9 kilometers. 5 miles, a little bit over 5 miles. Whereas the distance from the city center in the case of Male in Chile was 39 kilometers. Another factor that minimizes the loss of life. Frequency of big quakes. Now, this is a human psychological factor. If you know that you're prone for big quakes, you build them into your preparations. The government doesn't have a hard time getting the taxpayer to pay for preparations, and there's more education. It builds its way into the folklore, so people very often know what to do about big quakes. Haiti, even though it's in an active seismic zone, does not have a tremendous history of big quakes. It was lost from much of the traditional memory, and poor Haiti. Haiti is dealing with so many other problems that it could ill afford to focus on a disaster that hasn't happened in hundreds of years, you see? And so that's a big factor. Chile, on the other hand, is the place where the world record earthquake and tsunami took place and has lots of experience. And another factor I don't have on the chart here is wealth. Haiti is a very poor country. Chile is one of the richest countries in the Western Hemisphere. And so they can afford it as well. Well, last but not least, that results to the development of preparedness, and preparedness in the case of Haiti for earthquakes was, of course, relatively little, whereas in Chile, you stop a school child and you ask them what you're supposed to do in an earthquake and what's a tsunami about, and he can give you a good lesson. So those are the factors. Those are human factors, in large part, that make that difference. Well, Dominica gets its share of tremors. And just to show you a few recent ones. In February, you had one in the water, southeast of Dominica. And then more recently, in April, there was that small one right here on land. Okay, next. And then even more recently, just mentioned, was this one recorded by the Seismic Research Center. We all want to give credit to the Seismic Research Center of the University of the West Indies, our cousin school, which we really very much appreciate because of the great work they do in the geosciences. Next slide. So then, in summary, and there's a lesson to be learned here too. So you know that in November of 2004, you experienced a 6.3 here, and it was destructive. The Catholic Church in the lower left-hand corner, of course, was a result of that. After that, there was a 7.4. You say 7.4, that's stronger than our 6.3. But see the comparison again? Look at the depth. The 7.4 occurred at a depth of 146 kilometers, whereas the 6.3 occurred at a depth of 18 kilometers. So the size of the earthquake is not the only factor. How deep it is in the earth and how close it is to you are important factors as well. And then, of course, there's the, just for comparison, there's the Port-au-Prince, Haiti earthquake, which was, a 7.0 and a depth of 13 kilometers. All right, so the results, results. Stress on strain on structures breaks them apart. Composite materials, concrete block, poured concrete, everything fall apart. Liquefaction, the soil becomes jelly-like and cannot sustain structures that may have pilings driven in to hold up buildings. Landslides, underwater slumps take place. Sometimes the ground just cracks right open with offsets. Boulders, if boulders are placed precipitously where they could fall and they're not supported with some sort of a rock wall or something, they might tumble and cause harm. I put mildly disturb the ocean. That is another way of saying tsunami. That's a factor. And then last but not least, I mentioned before, hazmat releases. So what should you do? You know already, and you know right now, and it's part of the safety briefing. Should an earthquake occur, you have to put this into Tropical's future. Drop, cover, and hold, meaning get onto the table. And I urge you in making decisions, even if it's a small table, a small chair, even those side armchairs that students use in class, protect your heads. Something may fall on you, a piece of timber, it could break your arm, it might puncture your lung, it might damage your kidney. That's not so bad. Don't let it hit your head. Protect your brains at all points. So when you duck, cover, and hold, protect your heads primarily. Please remember that. All right? And then if you're near the sea, and it's a really big earthquake, one that's so large that you really have difficulty holding your footing, and it lasts 20, 30 seconds, which is a very long time for an earthquake, then there's a potential that that earthquake created a tsunami, so keep your eyes on the sea next for the tsunami. Well, what makes our region, moving on, what makes our region susceptible to volcanoes? And you have a magma source. And this business of subduction that I mentioned, where one plate goes under the other, causes melting of part of the crust, and that gives the source, the resource of the magma or the molten rock material that will make for your volcano. It becomes hot, expands, and light, less dense, so it migrates to the surface. If it breaks the surface, you call it a volcano. Next slide. All right, and the Caribbean volcanoes are many, and Dominica has its share. In spite of the fact, first of all, I'll go through them. You have Soufriere Hills, which started erupting in 1995 and is still erupting. I'll mention more about that. You have Mount La Soufriere in St. Vincent, which erupted many times, most recently in 1979. Some people don't know that in 1902, 1,500 people lost their lives in St. Vincent. All right? You do know, probably from lore, that in 1902, Mount Pelée in Martinique erupted, and until the Haitian tragedy of 2010, the earthquake, this was the greatest loss of life in historic time due to natural disaster. Almost 30,000 people lost their lives in 15 minutes, in that situation. And then you know about Kikimjeni. You hear about it. It's a submarine volcano. I wouldn't worry about it too much for some reasons that I'll mention, but it is a potential threat for tsunamis, at least. Next slide. All right. Oh, one thing. What about Dominica's volcanoes? Well, your volcanoes have been sleeping for a while, but they're just sleeping. You know that, right? Okay. They're just sleeping, just like Montserrat's was just sleeping. You know, just like St. Vincent's was just sleeping. They can come to life. And not to worry you too much, but the geological record shows that the biggest, most expansive explosions from volcano in the entire Caribbean occurred here. There's all sorts of debris way into the Atlantic and way into the Caribbean that came from eruptions of Dominica's volcanoes, but thousands of years ago. So your volcanoes can come to life. Just keep your eye on them, or your ear. So, and of course, so back in 1888, someone did this lithograph of your boiling lake. Amazing, eh? And next slide. And then I took this picture in 1997. Boiling Lake is still boiling. All right? Now let's talk about Kikim-Jenny for a while. Okay? It first experienced eruption in 1939. It actually broke the surface. There was no loss of life, and it has continued to grow. I was among people who studied it in 1996, in 2002, and 2003. And so the images you see in the lower left-hand corner, upper right-hand, all these images are that. The biggest immediate threat from Kikim-Jenny is to navigation in the region. Because should it start to, it doesn't have to erupt fully, but should it start to become active, it puts gases and hot water into the ocean, which reduces the buoyancy of the ocean, and vessels moving nearby will find they sit lower in the water and may even sink. Next slide. All right. And you may not know that you have a little twin inactive, dormant, dead actually, volcano off the northeast of Dominica. We discovered this in 2003 on one of the cruises done jointly with the Seismic Research Center and with NOAA, the U.S. National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. And they called it Twin Peaks. Now, here's a story I want to tell you about a volcano tragedy. In 1902, Saint-Pierre, Martinique was the center of French culture in the Caribbean. It wasn't Fort-de-France. All the action was in Saint-Pierre. It was very active, and it was a period of political upheaval where the old white French were trying to hold on to power. Slavery was finished, of course, and democracy had come. But in fact, there was a struggle for power. Nobody gives up power easily. And the French were trying to hold on. As a result, they made some decisions that contributed to the loss of life that would occur. Because the volcanoes don't just come to life overnight. They gave you lots of warning, mostly in the form of earthquakes. And I should tell you, the Caribbean Development Bank, Seismic Research Unit, the Dominica authorities have all helped finance a system that helps you monitor the volcanoes in your region. So when they start to come to life, you get lots of warning, okay? Just as Montserrat got lots of warning, okay? Well, they paid, even though 600 people had lost their lives in an early event, the government decided not to move the people out of Saint-Pierre because they didn't want to disturb an election that was about to happen, because every day meant that the new party might push them out of authority. So not only did they insist that the election go on, but they put gendarmes at the gates of the city so people couldn't leave. And the governor, who didn't live in Saint-Pierre, he moved into Saint-Pierre with his wife and daughter to prove that he was not afraid. Well, folks, in the morning of, I think it was May 8th in 1902, the volcano did what it had been threatening to do. It was not only a failure of government, though. It was also a failure of the small scientific community. The press was very terrible. They didn't ask the right questions. They just went along with the government line, and there was lots of evidence that would cause well-educated people, as the residents of Saint-Pierre largely were, to ask questions. Those questions were not asked, and so within 15 minutes, what was to be, would later be better understood to be a pyroclastic flow. It's a hot avalanche of rock material, gases, and ash, rolled down the hill and wiped out the city, so the city that looked like that before on the left looked like it did on the right. That was a tragedy, and like Katrina in New Orleans, it had a large, the human factor contributed greatly to the magnitude of the tragedy. All right. On the other hand, Montserrat, in spite of the fact you might listen to the radio and you might hear the opposition, the government, proponents battering each other, they did the right thing. They collaborated well in advance. They listened to the Seismic Research Unit and the British Geological Society. They prepared. They had public materials. They had coloring books. Arrow sang a song. Jimmy Buffett, I don't know when the volcano is going to blow. Psychologically, they were prepared. So when the government said move, the people moved. And it wasn't for 2 years. The volcano just harassed the devil out of the people of Montserrat. Population went down. They had to give up their farms that were near the volcano and so forth. But it took 2 years for any loss of life to occur. when a very surprising event, behavior of the volcano took some lives. But Montserrat did the right thing, right? Let's always remember that. If you want to get a case study of good collaboration between the private sector, the press, the government, and the educational sectors, Montserrat's a good case. Next. So then, let's move on. Tsunamis. What makes you prone to tsunamis? Well, you have to have earthquakes near the coast, of course. Anything that's involved tectonically, meaning the motion of the plates, landslide in or near the sea, volcanic eruptions in or near the sea. Some small ones did occur off of Montserrat and did create little tsunamis that went and pestered Guadeloupe, but they were small, they didn't reach this far. Of course, if you hit the ocean with a meteor or an asteroid or some weird meteorological effects, you can also create tsunamis as well. Next. So that will cause them. And essentially, the most common way is when the Earth's crust moves, and it moves in or near the ocean. A displacement of the crust throws that energy into the water column, and that water propagates out from wherever it occurs into the land, and that's when it becomes a hazard. If you're out in deep water and a tsunami passes you, you're not aware of it. The wavelength is so long and the energy being transmitted to your vessel is so little that you would not know it went past you. But as it comes in closer in the bottom picture, the energy is compressed. It's by the seafloor becoming more shallow. The waves bunch up, they rise up. Fortunately, they do slow down, but that's when you get the big bad impacts. Next slide. Okay, and if you look at this graph done by Smith and Shepard when it was a seismic research unit at the University of the West Indies, they did time of travel. And you notice that if Kikimjeni were to erupt, you would have 40 minutes warning time. There would be time for your, first of all, remember, Kikimjeni is a volcano, so it would have been giving hints all along. And then when it does finally erupt, you have 40 minutes to get to safety from a tsunami. And a lot of lives can be saved in 40 minutes. However, because Kikimjeni is small, because it's under so much water, and because it has to distribute the energy of any kind of eruption over such a broad area, we do not expect the effects of Kikimjeni erupting at present depth to be catastrophic. Now, should it grow and come closer to the surface, that's another story. But we studied it in 1996, and it has not substantially grown towards the surface since then. All right? Now, what about more locally? Well, it's concerned that your Mont au Diable should have flank collapse. Just imagine the volcano just turns, has a little bowel movement or something, you know, with the result that it doesn't erupt, but it creates earthquakes. And those earthquakes dislodge landslides, because you know about landslides, and those should fall into the ocean. Well, the conditions off of the coast of that coast of Dominica are such that it can create tsunamis. I would imagine, though, that your tsunamis would be more hazardous to people north of you, east and west of you, than, say, down, Roseau and places like that. Next. All right. And now, if you look more broadly, you look up in my region, up in the Caribbean, near the Northeast Caribbean. We have the Puerto Rico Trench, we have the Virgin Islands Basin, we have the Anegada Passage, all very active and all with great potential for creating the kind of earthquakes that can send a tsunami to you. Travel time to you would be more than an hour, so once again, you would have warning time. The area is well outfitted with instruments so that you would be warned. That would be called a regional tsunami. It would take more than an hour to get to you. All right, on the order of an hour. They can also come from Central America and South America and from the Yucatan-Cayman Trench as well. Next slide. And distant tsunamis, there's a record of those. They can come from across the Atlantic. In 1755, Lisbon, Portugal experienced a very catastrophic earthquake that created a very big tsunami. The earthquake and tsunami destroyed Lisbon and many of the major cities around there and sent a tsunami across the ocean. It was measured in Antigua, it was measured in Barbados. It was not measured in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and I don't believe it was measured here. But that has a lot to do with how waves behave. Sometimes they'll hit you but not hit your neighbor. And so, but it's a possibility. Also a possibility is a repeat of the 1929 Nova Scotia earthquake and tsunami, which did send energy down this way, but by the time it got here, it was very weak. It could occur again, of course, and it might be stronger, but it's something to keep in mind. The lucky thing is travel time for those in the order of 8 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours. So there's lots of preparation time there. And then this picture, this is not a photograph, of course. This is an artist's conception of what would happen should Cumbria Vieja volcano in the Canary Islands erupt. And they believe the eruption is, the conditions for the eruption would be such that it could create a very big tsunami, which would cross the Atlantic and hit, say, South Florida, something like this. Next. All right? So there's a chart. The first column is an interesting one where you see the warning times. For a local one, you have less than an hour. For a regional one, you have 1 to 3 hours. And for a distant one, something like coming across the Atlantic, you might have 8 or more hours. And I have some of the sources listed there. Next slide. All right. So what do you do? What's the correct human response to a tsunami threat? It's to escape. That is to say, to run. Okay? You know, don't be worried about how you dress. Forget those heels. You know, take off the heels and run. All right? Further, you want to run up. A lot of people think about running far. Well, if you have enough flat land, the tsunami is going to catch you. You can't run far enough inland if you're not going up. You want to go up. And if up on a hill or a slope is too difficult, then deal with what is called vertical evacuation, building nearest to you. Suppose there's no building. Then a pole. Don't be too proud. All right? A tree. Look at this tree. The little girl is up in the top of a palm tree where she's still in danger because she's still in the water. The tsunami is still swirling about her, but she's still alive. You see, she took that first step. And at this point, she can be rescued. If she just said, I can't climb that tree, well, she would not be, you know, a photograph would not have been taken. Presumably the photographer helped. Anyway, next slide. So now, as I conclude, I want to speak about what longer range, and I can't really get into all the aspects of global climate change, except to tell you it is real. The aspects, you know, it is real, and it's manifested already. We see the rise in sea surface and atmospheric temperature, and so we worry about sea level rise, which will affect some of our flat neighbors like Anguilla and Marie-Galante and places like that, more than hilly places like the Virgin Islands or Dominica. But still, it's going to impact your coastal development. Intensified storms will affect the whole area. We greatly worry about that. Altered rainfall. Dominica does not generally have a water problem, but if the rainfall changes, as lush and as well as the interior of Dominica holds water, if the water doesn't eventually replenish itself with rain, it won't be there. I worry very much about altered rainfall for marginal areas like my place where rain is not as abundant. Ocean acidification. You may think, what is that? It's where the ocean becomes so acid that your shellfish cannot perish. So your conch and your wilkes and your lobster cannot develop. And this is very significant for the industries of some Caribbean islands. Right? Next slide. All right, and those are some of the things, you know, the sea level rise and so forth. Next slide. The rising temperature is already occurring. Caribbean precipitation is already going down. Next slide. And of course, it's caused by the greenhouse gases. Don't leave your engines running. You know, I really very much appreciated the Deacon's comments this morning because it was an environmental message. Very much appreciated because, you know, waste not, want not. And by not creating some of these problems, you don't have to adjust for them later on. Next, and I think this is my last slide, yes. I want to thank you very much. In talking about global climate change, however, the one thing, we don't know what's going to impact Dominica the worst, sea level rise, weather, storms. But what you do know, and the way to prepare for it, the one thing you know how to prepare for is by having the expertise. Please encourage some of your young people to study the geosciences and geotechnology. Okay? I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Watlington. I know you said do not worry, but I couldn't help but be worried during that presentation. And it brings to light the importance of why it is that we are here, the importance of planning, the importance of working together to be prepared. Before we take a short coffee break of 5 minutes, I would like to thank our sponsors, CBN4 and DSL from Trinidad, for our live streaming. We're on Facebook and on our website. I would also like to thank the media, most of which have left already, but I would like to thank DBS Radio, the Chronicle newspaper, Vibes Radio, DA Vibes, Dominica News Online, and of course CBN4. The bathrooms are towards the back of the room, so we'll meet back here in 5 minutes. Okay? Thank you.
driver of PS 569 needs to move a vehicle. It's blocking someone. PS 569. Thank you.
Response agencies. non-governmental and community-based organizations, as well as small and large businesses that operate in and serve the community.
Attention, attention. We could all be seated, please. As we move on to the second part of our program today, I would like to introduce Ms. Jennifer Nugent Hill. She's the Director of Governmental and Community Affairs at Tropical Shipping. Welcome.
Goodness, I am so excited and happy to be in Dominica again. I've always said to folks that Dominica happens to be one of those places that I consider to be the real last vestige of the Caribbean. If you want to find what the West Indies used to look like, come to Dominica. And when I got off the plane, I said to Mark, our VP, oh, I can breathe, but I want some roast plantain in the bag, some suki bread with some saltfish in the middle. I wanted mangoes. And what else did I want, Mark? Just about everything that was Dominica, huh? And ginger punch. No alcoholic, no alcohol. And we stopped along the way. I said whenever I come to Dominica, I always feel like I can breathe. And Dominica holds a very special, special place in our hearts. It captures the emotion of truly what nature represents. And so for us, it was very timely, very ironic that we're talking about disaster preparedness and our readiness for resiliency, and to be able to enjoy the nature of Dominica that doesn't exist anywhere else. And you know, Mark in his presentation almost made me cry, because I know that he speaks from the heart about, you know, Dominica, and most importantly, the leadership of our manager, Ms. Tamara Lowe, who's just amazing, and her team. And all that she brings to the company is herself, her leadership, her skill, her talent, but more importantly, she's truly a nature girl. So in the essence of time, and because we're really behind, and this portion of the presentation that's about to come up after I've given you just an overview of preparing for the unthinkable in terms of some tips on business continuity practices, for us it's really where we get together as a group and we start to talk about some of the things that we heard, especially from Mr. Shillingford and Professor Watlington, and the presentation that was made by Teresa and Stephanie, that sets the tone for what we really want to do in a few minutes, which is really the collaboration, the coordination, the cooperation. Our good partners, especially Nivea Butler, who's here with Southcom, comes with the ability to help us create some best practices and demonstrate what we're capable of doing in Dominica for ourselves. The rule of thumb that I always say to people is in disaster planning is that every disaster is local, and local is the first response. And in order to respond and recover more appropriately and quickly requires preparation. And as my dear friend Benoit described our preparation and the testing and the exercise and really auditing our own selves and our own plan will help us to prepare. So when we have to duck, roll, and hide, is that where we go, Professor? Duck, roll, and hide, cover the head, we would know exactly what to do without panic and chaos. So with that in mind, let me just quickly talk to you about some strategies in preparing your business continuity plans, especially for the private sector, the businesses that are here, and I thank you for your presence. But a question you have to ask yourself, because we all agree after hearing that disasters are going to happen, and Dominica is vulnerable to just about everything. The question is, are we prepared to respond and to recover? We know that Dominica was cut off from sections of Dominica was cut off last year with Tropical Storm Erica. When I saw the pictures, it reminded me really, as I said to someone, what happened in Dominica with Tropical Storm Erica, at least when you saw it on Facebook, reminded me of the tsunami that took place in Thailand when the raging waters just kept coming and coming, and we know we lost a lot of our family, friends, and neighbors last year. So the question that we really want to ask ourselves is, are we prepared for the unthinkable? The unthinkable is what we don't think about that can happen. When we were in Trinidad earlier this week with the presentation, one of our guest speakers who couldn't join us today made some comments that I thought was just really troubling. He says, it's not what you know that should bother you. It's what you don't know that you really don't know that you don't know. And I'm thinking, oh, wait a minute, that's sheer madness? What I don't know about what I don't know, I should be concerned. So how do you prepare for the unthinkable? The thing that you really don't know is going to happen. You can really do it. There are some things that you really can prepare for. All of you are here after Erica, so you must have done something to sort of help prepare yourself for survival. Am I correct? We did something. Not that the others didn't, but they were in the path of a destructive storm that they couldn't get out of. So the question is, what is really a disaster? For us in the business continuity planning area, we always say that it's that unplanned interruption of your critical business processes, the things that you cannot do without to run your business or your organization. So as you start to think about planning writing your business continuity plan, it has to focus on those things and the personnel that you cannot do without. But business interruptions are going to come. They're going to occur. You're going to lose revenue. We know that there's some people who are no longer employed in Dominica, right? We heard of the factory, of the Palmolive or Colgate factory that no longer exists because the storm ran through that plant. People are out of work. So lots of revenue to the government because those persons aren't paying taxes anymore, and they're dependent on someone or some other agency to survive. Loss of productive employees. So we want to always be mindful as we think about. We do know, and this is true, 1 out of 4 businesses may never reopen after a disaster for various reasons. The Chamber of Commerce puts out a study a few years ago, and it was from a National Chamber of Commerce study, where we did agree that if you put 4 of us in this room and we're all running our business, one of us, if a disaster occurs, will not be here again, may never recover. So will your business be one of them? So for me, when I think about the disasters of the Caribbean, we remind ourselves of the most recent ones, the costly ones, the ones that took lives, the ones that changed the landscape of our islands. I suffered through Hurricane Hugo on St. Croix, and I can tell you, as I told the joke, and someone told me they heard it on the internet, because by the way, you're on internet right now, and I said, Hurricane Hugo came through, and okay, so after 4 hours, you're like, oh my God, we're not going to survive this. And I turned to my husband, I said, confession time, so let me tell you something. And then when I was done, I said, no, you tell me, because if you want to go to heaven, you better tell me the truth. Hurricane Hugo was a defining moment, I think, for a lot of us in the Caribbean with regards to the what hurricanes could do. St. Croix still has not recovered fully from Hurricane Hugo of 1989. So we talk about the earthquakes, we talk about volcanoes, we talk about what can happen. When I heard Benoit mention that it's not just the storm, but it's also the high waves that can impact. All of us in Dominica are somewhat dependent on things being imported, except for you. You probably will survive because the bananas, the plantains, and the dashins and everything will sustain us for a while. I hope I'm here if there's a disaster. But we all know that we're so affected in the region because we're so dependent on a lot of tourism. Our economy is thriving. The agriculture industry, I understand, in Dominica was also affected, a lot of people forgot, was affected by Tropical Storm Erica. But you're also being affected by pandemic issues, diseases, pesticides, things that are really creating havoc. The question is, how do we prepare? So what I want to suggest to you is that there are things you need to identify. And when we get together in our group session in a few minutes, the question that you're really going to be asking yourself, and we have some co-facilitators, some facilitators who are going to create some conversation with you, but it's really your time to think about your own vulnerability. So in writing a continuity plan, you're going to ask yourself, what are the vulnerabilities? Where is my business located? Am I in a floodplain area? Can I get out? Am I extremely dependent on the internet? What about telephone service? How dependent am I on Flow and cable and wireless and Digicel and everything else? Have we incorporated the dependency on that? Have you backed up your system on the cloud? What are we doing in terms of the use of technology today to help us be ready, which is a critically important thing, and we'll talk a little bit about the impact of the internet and electronics on our ability to recover. So does your business continuity plan, and by the way, let me ask this question, how many of us have a business continuity plan? That's okay, if you don't have one, we'll help prepare one today. All right, so less than half of this room. For those who have their plan, you may want to think about what happened with Erica, and did you address and adjusted your plan based on that incident last year? That's a good telltale sign to show you gaps, because if you were so impacted that you couldn't function for a day, and I don't know any business that can afford to be out of operations for a day because that's loss of money, you may need to think about what's in your plan that affected you last year. If it's telecommunication, then we need to come up with an alternative strategy. And I always say, and Mark mentioned it this morning, one of the things that we have for years learned critically important at Tropical is that our plan means nothing if our staff doesn't have a plan for themselves. And if we can't provide or take care of the people who will take care of us and the business, then we would not have an effective plan. And so for us, we always encourage companies and businesses and organizations to make provisions in your plan for your employees and your employees' family. Because I can tell you, if there's a disaster in my daughter, and I have one picnic, if that one picnic is affected, my ability to function becomes less than my best. So you have to concern yourself with that writing of the plan to include your family. Next slide. So here are some steps that I want to suggest that you think about. And by the way, if you want a copy of the presentation, please be sure to get to our manager, Tamara, and she will be happy to share with you the information. You have to agree, if you work for a company, you're not the owner of the company. If you're the owner of the company, you're the executive. So you need to be leading the cause for writing continuity plans, the best one you can. If you're not and you work for a company, you need to be able to get the manager or the owner of the organization to recognize the importance of having a continuity plan well written towards the risk that you are currently operating under. Conduct that vulnerability analysis. We're going to share with you today a few tips how you should conduct the vulnerability analysis, and the things that you should be asking yourself as you do your own evaluation. And you need to concern yourself with the people who are part of your supply chain. And when we say those persons that are part of your supply chain as a business, you want to make sure the people whom you are dependent for the things you need to keep your business running. I mentioned Flow, I mentioned cable and wireless, whomever your telecommunication, your utility provider, that you understand how they function. In the business sector, one of the things that we're encouraging, and we now have adopted that fully at our company, is to embrace the fact that we are dependent on others to supply us with, say, fuel for the ships or whatever else you need for your business. You need to make sure they have a way to get to you if there's a disaster, because you may be okay, but the person who supplies you may not be. So that means you're stuck. So you need to concern yourself, and today more and more companies, the Walmarts of the world, the large companies are making it a requirement. Mark mentioned in Trinidad early this week that one of the things that the cruise industry are now asking for, they're asking their supply chain to tell me about how you're going to recover. They want to see your insurance plan. They want to make sure that you're covered. They want to make sure that you have a plan to recover, because if they are dependent on you to get the ship in and out, they need to understand that you are. And you know what? It's becoming a competitive advantage. That's a hint. Next slide. So, I always say it doesn't have to be complicated. A continuity plan really just describes the essential business processes. So I always say, make it workable. And you know who can help you make a workable plan? The people who work for you, or you know the way you conduct the business. Sit down, take a day, half an hour, half a day, and just ask the employees from your team, tell me how we do this, and what do you do with the chicken wire when that thing don't work? How you get the chicken wire to make that thing work? You know, I always say that there are simple ways to get it done. One of the things, however, we've done is that, as Tammy mentioned this morning, in the thumb drive, we have provided you with a list of samples for how to write a plan, as well as some websites that have very simple plans, and they're free. You can download it and just copy it into your own plans. Very simple. The important thing is to have one. So make it workable. Make it cost effective. Make it easy to maintain. It shouldn't be so complicated. The idea is to get your business up and running, and you can write a plan based on how vulnerable your organization is and how much stress time you can afford to be out of operation. Some people simply can never be down. If you're an internet service provider, you can't be down if people are dependent on you. So make your plan easy to maintain. We always encourage, especially in the Caribbean, is that you have what I call a simple crisis communication plan. One of the things that is important for us, and I'll share with you an example at our company, one of the things that we do is that we want to know where every employee lives. When Tropical Storm Erica tore through Dominica, we wanted to find Tammy and her team. Mark knew if she's not here, she's not able to get on the phone, chances are she was going to be where we know she would be. You need to sit down with your team and ask and identify somewhere in your plan, and keep it on your mobile device as well, where they live. Now, because I'm a Caribbean woman, I'm going to talk to you Caribbean style. So for those of us ladies, notice I didn't say the fellas, some of us have a second home someplace, you know, a second. Make sure we have the phone number too. You notice I didn't say the guys, right? Because I've been accused of saying, you think it's only the men that have two homes someplace else? I didn't say it. But you know what I mean. You want to be able to find you. So that girlfriend or that extra boyfriend, make sure we know where to find you. And we always joke about it, but it's a reality. The important thing is that we want to find our people so we can provide recovery for them. So that was a Caribbean joke. Anybody on the internet listening to me, if you're not from the Caribbean, too bad, you don't know. Classify and rank those important, critical business functions, what you must have in order to get the business open. Be it a password to get into the building, or that key that nobody knows that you had put where you had your critical financial documents. Very simple. Next slide. So, a well-developed plan talks about where the staff are, what you're going to do to keep the operations going, what alternative site you have. I don't know how many of you had to move your location to somewhere else to function. You need to concern yourself with that. And really what we're trying to say is that if you have to go somewhere else, just write it in so that if you're affected, your family may know that your business is going to have to move this place, and make the plan and make the adjustment, but just write it down. Make sure that someone knows how to continue the operations of the business. And the bottom line is, the way that I encourage small businesses in particular to write their plan is to ask yourself, what if? Just a simple question. What if this happens? And the answer becomes part of your plan. What if I can't do this? That becomes. What if I can't reach Mark? And it's a very, very easy, simple way to do it. Now, it can get very complex, there's no question, because it depends on the nature of the business that you do. But simple questions begin the process, which is what we're going to do very shortly. The idea is to control the outcome. Next slide. The idea is that a business continuity plan, being well written, exercised and tested, helps you to control the outcome of a disaster. Always think about your records management. Back up your system in the cloud, create your private code, make sure someone else knows how to access it. If you can't do it in the cloud, and the cloud allows you, for those who are technical guru, you obviously know that I'm not. I messed up a couple times trying to get the program up. Find out those persons. In Dominica, there are a lot of young, bright minds who can help you, figure out how to get your records management in the cloud. That means you can access it from any place, from any device, and those of you who know better, don't listen to me. I always say simply what you're doing is creating a company safety deposit box to protect and back up your businesses, your financial document, your personnel record, all the things that are critically important, the telephone numbers of the persons you need to reach. So a safety box, and you notice I have it in quotes, it's really the idea, think of a business continuity plan as a safety deposit box. Really, that's what you're doing. I encourage you to think about workforce. If you are dependent on one employee and that one employee is affected, need to know that you have someone else that can help you. This is how in small communities we encourage what we call the sharing, of personnel with skill sets that can easily be tapped into. I don't know if it exists in Dominica, but it's one of the things I would encourage in the Chamber of Commerce when Teresa participates in the work group. There are things that I'm sure we can all talk about, sharing of personnel during disasters from a business-to-business perspective. So, someone's got to be in charge. And so we always say your continuity plan has to identify a chain of command. Someone has to be in charge, and everyone should know who's that person in charge. And sometimes it's not the owner of the business. Sometimes it's the second in command, because the owner of the business really should be probably thinking about other matters. So establishing a chain of command for disaster response isn't necessarily the person who owns the business, but it is someone who has the capacity to keep things moving and flowing while the owner focuses on the other bigger aspect. Next slide. So there are some things that I must tell you about this growing concern for the region. How many of you know that you've been hacked? Well, let me put it this way. How many of you have been hacked? How many of you have been hacked once? How many of you have been hacked twice? And if I know myself, maybe by the time I go out next week, I'll be hacked again. So we had someone that presented in Trinidad, and he was so amazing with the reality of what's happening. But I've been paying attention, reading a lot, talking to the experts about the Caribbean. And the Caribbean is a target for a number of reasons. Hackers do this for a business. In their minds, hacking is a business, and it is a business. They're transacting every minute, every second, moment to moment. And the region has become very vulnerable because of they perceive we don't have good backup system, or we probably don't. But they also know that there is something very critical that occurs in the Caribbean. Lots of electronic transaction, banking, tourism, people's credit card, exactly. Always paying the bills. And we want the people who travel to our islands to know that they're safe, that they're physically safe, but they're also secured. So as a region, we need to really start focusing very, very heavily, because all it takes is one person to have had a bad experience as a result of coming to Dominica and staying in a hotel and their credit card was hacked. Because you know what? The second it happens, Twitter gets it. Next thing you know, it's on Instagram. Don't go to Dominica. Them people do this and they do that. We can't afford that in Dominica. So we as business owners need to think about our security and our cybersecurity, because it is a terrorist activity. And you're being threatened more and more, and it's becoming very costly. Next slide. So I just want to suggest to you 5 steps. This was presented by Microsoft, and we got permission from the SBA to use this 5-step. they created some simple ways for small businesses to think about securing your business. This was geared to small business under an agreement with Microsoft. But I thought it made sense because this is what you should be doing, whether you're small or big, or individual companies. Some of us are small homeowner cottage business. Strengthen your computer. Avoid downloading stuff that is, you don't know where it came from. Some things look real. Somebody sent me an email, and I think I was sharing it with Marsh, that I got this thing on my email, or Mark, and it says, we found your cell phone, your battery is low. You know what was frightening about it? It was true. But I don't have on that particular cell phone finding my cell phone device. That scared me yesterday, or two nights ago, because I'm trying to figure out how did they know that, because the battery was low. And I had not downloaded the app on that particular phone to tell me where to locate the phone. How they know? So, strengthen and avoid downloading malware. Small Caribbean islands, especially bed and breakfast, we're into the bed and breakfast. People love to stay to experience our culture. They want to stay bed and breakfast. They want to stay in small properties. But if you don't have this, trust me, you're going to be out of business. And teach your people how to create, strong password. You can get this information if you want it again from Tam. Next slide. Go back one more. Okay, advance. So, network data management, test it often. Cybersecurity is a business issue. If you've not written it into your business plan, you need to rethink it, go back in, tell your business, your owners, your company, or if you're the owner, need to know that cybersecurity. You know why? Because if my data gets breached, I can sue you. You're now liable for protecting me. You promised me that everything that I did with you online was secure. So now insurance companies are telling businesses, tell me about your cybersecurity measures. Now you can't foolproof everything, we know that. But at the end of the day, you can demonstrate that you had concern yourself and it helps protect you. Hackers and their ransom are very experienced. I won't talk about countries, but I know one country paid for some data. Public knowledge, the U.S. always puts everything out. We know that U.S. personnel, the federal government personnel agency was hacked. We don't know how much they paid, but over 20 million employees in the U.S. federal government system, their personal data was hacked. You may not know now, but I promise you, the information you transact online and the portion of information you may have that you think someone else doesn't have, they're gathering data. Very soon someone will create a profile. Next thing you know, you become part of the hacker's file. So managing threats from a business perspective is now a business transaction. You need to focus on writing that in your plan. And as I said earlier, no online security is ever perfect. You just constantly have to provide, because there are people who are doing this as business, so they're at the game every time that you think you've gotten over. So I close with this slide, 2 more slides, and it says the cost of not having a business continuity plan is too high. This was Haiti. This for me has become a hallmark sign of what possibly could happen. Professor Watlington described part of the reasons where the death toll was so heavy. It's because we're so heavily concentrated in the capital of Haiti. Think about what we're doing here in Roseau and where we are and the vulnerabilities, and prepare. So, as I mentioned, St. Croix has not recovered from Hurricane Hugo of '89. There are hotels that still abandoned. The refinery was crushed. Those tanks that we thought were steel were like foil paper. Oil was everywhere, contamination, and the resulting impact for St. Croix is what it is. There's an example of leadership. Mark shared with us, and that's going to be the cause for the next minute or so, is that Mark talked about leadership. If Rick Morrell was here, our CEO, he would always encourage us to discuss best practices. This is the island, the country of Cozumel, the state of Cozumel in the country of Mexico. Cozumel was impacted by Wilma, but they came together. The private sector and the government took leadership role, and within 30 days, they were back up and running. You see the before and after. Can we do that in Dominica? Can we do that in Dominica? Are we prepared? So, we know what we're vulnerable to. The question that I ask, next slide, finally, is this. There are heroes in any disaster. There are people who step in instead of stepping away. Will you step in today for Dominica's sake, for business continuity purposes. And as my CEO, and I always put that quote that said, take care of your people and they will take care of you. This is leadership in action. So I thank you for thinking about business continuity and how to write your plan. And at the end of the day, this gentleman who started out this morning really took to heart Dominica. And so I placed this picture of Mark Lopez being recognized by the Dominica Association in Florida, thanking him and his team for how we recovered. I put that there not because Mark is here, but because at the end of the day, leadership in action with your heart in the right place, and as the video said, having the skin of a rhino, but having the heart of a lion, the heart of an angel, can really make you an effective leader for Dominica. So let's get together to work for a few seconds. I'm going to ask my teammate to come up, because what we're going to do right now is to, thank you very much, thank you. Alice is going to give us some instructions as to what group and where we go for this section